You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders. I'm David Deary, president of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. You might be able to see behind me that it's Christmas time. So regardless when you're seeing this, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. So joining us today is Joe Grgetich. Joe is an old friend of mine. Joe and I served together back, we met in 2008. Joe joined the Navy in 1983, a year before I did. He completed 32 years of service before he transitioned out a few years ago. Joe is joining us today from his home, where he up in Washington State. He lives in Ocean Shores, Washington, where he is owns a business called Too Cool Sportswear. He and his wife Pam giving back to the community up there. Joe, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, David. I'm doing great.
Great. It's good to see you. So listen, I like to start all of our podcasts off with a little question. So as leaders, we give advice. It's what we do, whether it's solicited or not. And I think the older we get, the more unsolicited our advice is. We give it without being solicited for it. Let me ask you, what's the worst piece of leadership advice someone ever gave Joe Grgetich?
Oh, man, I bet you it was a first class about 25, 30 years ago when he said, you have to tell people what to do in order to get things done.
Oh, really? You got to tell them so people won't just follow you just because of who you are? You got to tell them what to do?
Well, I'd like to think on the grounds that I would rather tell them what to do instead of how to do it. So the worst advice was you have to tell them how to do it in order to get it done. Instead, it's a lot easier to tell them what needs to be done, asking them how are they going to get it done, and it gives them a little bit of ownership of the task at hand. And they're a little bit more proud of getting it done because they're getting it done because they're getting it done, not because I wanted them to get it done. So
that's great. That's not great. Great advice he gave you. Great how you spun it to use it to your advantage and encourage people to make decisions to take ownership and get things done. I've probably been guilty of doing what that first class told you to do, and had people come back and say, Dave, if you want to do it, you could just do it. So good on you. So listen, at 32 years you served. You were a young person because you're only about 40 years old now.
Yeah, thanks.
But what was it? Yeah. So what was it that got you to join the Navy in the first place?
My mom, she drove me down to the recruiter.
Okay.
The rest is
you're raised in Ohio. So what was wrong with Ohio? Why'd you want to leave Ohio and go in the Navy?
Long story short, when I joined the Navy, I had no idea I was actually joining the Navy. So I was actually going in to be a CB, but there was a 9-month delayed entry program, and I got the call from a recruiter that someone broke his leg, and I took his orders, and they said, it'd be cool, because I wanted to be a cop too. So they said, well, you can be a bosun mate, because that's the quickest way to become a cop, because back then you had to be an E5. So, yeah, be a bosun mate, and then you could be a police officer. But little did I know that you had to be an E5. They didn't tell me that when I joined. So,
yeah.
But
those recruiters.
Yeah, but I actually I came in a 3x6. So I actually got out of the Navy after 3 years and went to college for a year and a half. And then I was approached because I was in the reserves and I was an instructor. So I was approached to come back in the Navy and go instruct on the West Coast. And back then it was the LCM-8 boats, the knuckle busters. So, and then while I was in San Diego to report, I got the call that, hey, your orders are being modified. I'm going to Hawaii, and I was in charge of the Elite Honor Guard honors and ceremonies over there for 3 years.
Yeah, you've had a really unique career as far as the jobs that you were able to do over those 30 years. You just mentioned the honor guard working at the boathouse for the command of the Pacific Fleet, if I remember correctly. And when I met you many years after that, you were then a senior chief, E8 for those in the other services. And you were driving LCACs, landing craft air cushion, hovercrafts. So, in the mindset of leadership, let me ask you, clearly as a craft master, when you're the captain of your own craft and you're responsible for the crew and all the troops and gear that you are transporting ashore and deployments and what have you, what did you learn along the way growing up in the Navy to prepare you to be a leader at that level?
Not to micromanage. So, I mean, you got a tight knit crew, but there's usually two or three other boats that go with you, plus a maintenance team. So there's about 60 in a detachment. So, not to micromanage, but to get everybody on board as a team player, and make everybody aware that while we're deployed, this is a team thing. It's not an individual thing. So everybody had a hand in successful deployments, and it taught me how to step back a little bit and let the E5s, the middle leadership, actually take some responsibility. And when there's some downtime, to get some extra quals that they normally wouldn't get at ACU5. And for the most part, most of my debts that I ran, everyone got them outside qual on a ship, whether it be EL or Seesaw or in ops or on the bridge. So everybody had a hand in something within their rate, so they can promote. So to answer your question, not to micromanage, but to step back, let them shine.
And just to fill in some holes for those that may not be familiar, so in the Navy, there's different qualifications, just like every branch of the military has qualifications for your job. And when you're serving on board ships, there's additional qualifications that you could obtain. And what Joe is talking about in the crews that operate these hovercrafts, some of these that are engineers, for example, won't have opportunity to maybe get some traditional engineering qualifications that their peers that are operating on ships might get. So what Joe was able to do is, instead of micromanaging, from what I hear, Joe, instead of micromanaging and keeping everybody in house, only working on LCAC, staying on your craft, you allowed your crew, if not encouraged your crew, to go and explore the ship, get to know the people on the ship, and see where they can integrate with the crew of the host ship. Because you were just riding on the ship. They were transporting you to wherever the operation was taking place.
Yeah, one team, one fight. That's what we always preach. So why not act it? So be part of be part of the ship's crew too. And they did. They stood watches and everything.
So what's the craziest thing? We talked about craziness a little bit. What's one of the craziest things or oddest things or most stressful things in your career?
There's quite a few. At ACU5 with you under your leadership actually was we actually had a murder, and it was my loadmaster who was standing watch and was murdered that night. But it was the next morning where everybody was kind of footed to another part of the base for the investigation, and the leadership that came together and organizing 600 people and keeping them calm to the point everybody at that point knew something happened, but they didn't know exactly what happened. I mean, even for us as senior leaders, we didn't know exactly what happened. We just knew what, you know what I mean? So to organize everybody, keep them calm, keep the line, everybody had to line up for the NCIS investigators and just keeping them occupied with their minds set. It was that was probably the weirdest and most, you don't plan for something like that. And you get the call at 4 or 5 in the morning, come to work, something happened. You don't know what happened. And when you get there, you're just devastated. So, but the leadership really came together that day. And I believe that was the weirdest thing that ever happened to me. But it was also, a life experience, to say the least, as tragic as it was. Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, that was you're right. Yeah, they doesn't matter the leadership schools, preparatory schools, that you and I have both attended as command master chiefs. Those are scenarios,
and they're not in that. They're not in that teaching syllabus. That's for sure.
No, that's for sure, isn't it? So, there was, that was a stressful and rather sad time. That went on for about a month. a couple months actually, when you look at everything that transpired as a result of that incident. And it's still, that's been, gosh, going on 15 years. But every time I go on the compound, the guard shack is still there, still standing. Yeah, but there's been some fun times as well with ACU 5. I Yeah, you shared a story about I think it was ACU 5 about
Oh,
the
yeah.
captain just wanted a
So we
certain
were
answer.
tasked with getting about 45 boats up for, I think it was Dawn Blitz, and then revamping IEM and
Hmm.
maintenance and integrating training, given them ownership of the boats, and nothing the captain wanted actually worked. So we actually had a meeting, gone into his office, and he would, well, what about this? Can we do this? And I'm like, no, sir, this is why we can't do this. It doesn't work that way. He says, well, what if we do this? And I'm like, no, sir, you can't do it. And I show him that, we had all the data. I knew the questions he was going to ask. So we came in there and I said, no, I had solutions. This is what we can do. We made a time schedule and moved everybody. So it made more sense between maintenance training and up deployments, and Dawn Blitz was huge. So there was just a lot of moving factors that I don't think he was aware of at the time, and I just kept saying, no, sir, we couldn't do it. And then he paused and he says, so the XO's office is right next to the CO's, and he paused and he says, XO! And then the XO comes around the corner. He says, yes, sir. And the captain says, that'll be all. So he just wanted to hear a yes, sir in this whole conversation. But great captain, Captain Harrington. Love the guy to death. Good leader, very strict, very stern, but really took care of his people. And I wasn't afraid to tell him no, and I think that's why we got along so well. I wasn't going to sugarcoat nothing. If it didn't work, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it to give him a yes or yeah, we'll get it done, when it's quite impossible to get it done in the amount of time that we needed to get it done. But we managed to get it done. We were successful, but it was my way, not the.
So I just want to tie these stories together. There's an essential theme when you talk about not micromanaging the sailors, your team, encouraging them to go on and integrate to get those qualifications, and then working together during the tragedy where we had the murder, and then even when it comes to telling the captain no, oftentimes because you're putting people first, training, maintenance, and not doing things at a cost or at an expense just so the guy can hear yes sir, right? So it's like this servant leadership. As a leader, serving, we serve. I would look for servant leadership beyond just serving those that we have the honor to be able to be responsible for, but we're serving something even bigger, right? Service takes on so many different forms, if you will. Would you? I mean, I'm not really defining it so well. So, how would you define in your mind what would you say, or what does leadership mean to you?
Look, as a senior leader and you're in charge and you're the boss, the best advice I can give you is you're not 100 and you don't have to do it all. You're responsible for it all, but you don't have to do it all. So servant leadership, I was introduced to that in about 2009, 2010, and it really changed my life and the way I led. I would think I was more of a coach style of leadership before the servant leadership, even though servant leadership ties into coaching. But there's also a little
Right.
bit more to it than that. But when I was a command master chief and the captain wanted something done, the worst thing you can do is walk into the chief's mess and say, "Look, the captain wants to get this done." Yeah, I just took all my responsibility and just put it on the captain. So now they're going to work for the captain and not me. Instead, I walked into the mess, and they knew I just came from the captain. I said, "All right, this is what needs to get done. How are we going to do it?" And whether they broke up into teams or we just stood there and had a conversation how we were going to do it and come back later that day with and a plan, it gives back to that ownership thing. So I gave the mess ownership of a task the captain gave. Another example is we had a DRB for a sailor, one of the best DRBs ever. And the captain always allowed us to be, I never thought much about sending us any type of sailor to the captain. In my opinion, sending someone to mass, unless it was for, a serious misdemeanor or a felony, something out of our hands. But any leadership issue, whereas, I had to go to mass or see the captain, I didn't like that. That's letting the captain handle the leadership issue. And I wasn't about that. We can handle it at our level, and then I'll debrief the captain, and this is what we would like done. If the captain still wanted to see him at mass, he still wanted to see him at mass, but at least he always gave us the opportunity of handling. But this one particular DRB, we had a seaman in deck department. He was about 28 years old, older guy, a little bit more mature, but a lot quiet. We didn't have a first class or a chief in deck at the time, but we had a stellar second class, Stephen Alonzo. He's first class at AC5 right now. But Steve Alonzo was basically the LCPO of deck department as an E5, and had a lot of responsibility. And I would help out as a former bosun mate every now and then, but I kind of let him handle it, and some of the other chiefs always helped out as well. But he had this 128-year-old who was 6 years older than Alonzo at the time, and he just did not like the Navy. He was anti-Navy. So what did Alonzo do? He sent him mess cranking. So just to get him out of the hair. Well, I didn't know that. And while he was mess cranking, I'm like, all right, he's already 3 days into it. And so guess what? He was cranky there too. Nobody wanted to work with him. So where do you stick the guy you don't want to be around? In the deep sink, the worst possible position in mess cranking. So you got a 28-year-old that's been around a while, washing all the cooks, and all the cooks are 22, 23 years old too, and this 28-year-old's taking all these orders from all these younger guys who are more senior to him in rank-wise. But it was a terrible catastrophe. Well, he had enough of the Navy. He went up to his berthing, he packed everything in his sea bag, he went out on deck and threw it overboard. He threw everything overboard, off the ship. And when I got word, he did what? All right, so we were a little upset about that, and they wrote him up, and he was scheduled for DRB. But this is where servant leadership came in. Nobody knew this kid. Nobody knew him on a personal level. When someone comes to work late, you give him a chance, and he comes to work late the next day, and you're going to give him a counseling chip. But no one stops to take to have a conversation with this person and actually find out why he's being late. So, and that's where servant leadership comes in. So I dug into this kid's past. I shouldn't say kid. He was an older guy, 28 years old. And I found something that was just, I had goosebumps when I found out. And you would never know it because he never bragged about it. He never talked about it. So I went along with the DRB, and I brought him in, and I had all the chief's mess in there. And I let him start off, and, David, it was a brilliant acting job by him, because guess what? He wanted out of the Navy so bad, he wanted to piss the chiefs off in DRB. So if you can imagine all the F-bombs and, telling the chiefs to shut up, and I'm trying to maintain my composure because I kind of know what's going to happen in this DRB. The kid doesn't know I know. Nobody knows what I know, but nobody took the time to find out about what I know. So anyways, during the DRB, we had a Master Chief, Bob Grimmer. He was at AC5 and maintenance. Yeah. Oh boy, salty old Bob. He really. I'm like, Bob. Hey, Bob, sit down, calm down. It's okay. And this was Eric Rourke, Seaman Eric Rourke. And go ahead, Rourke. Continue on. I just want out of the Navy. I don't want to deal with this. I didn't sign up for this. And I said, well, Eric, let me tell you, you're a war hero. I know where you've been. So he did a tour in Iraq, and he had a squad, and out of his squad, he managed to save only one of them, in a heavy firefight in Fallujah. He's got a Bronze Star. So what happened was he got out of the Marine Corps, missed it, and decided to come back in the Navy as a SEAL. So the worst, I don't like the way they do things in the SEAL, but when you ring the bell or drop off, you don't make it, then you do the needs of the Navy. So that's what happened to Seaman Rourke. He signed up to be a SEAL. He actually rang the bell. He didn't like being a SEAL, and then they assigned him to our ship, and that didn't want to be there. So how can I make it better for him? So anyways, during the DRB, and I'm telling Rourke, I'm like, you're a war hero. You've seen more combat. You've done more for this country than me and Master Chief Grimmer has done in 60 years combined. I salute you. I understand why you don't want to be here. I understand why you didn't sign up for this stuff. And I'm here to congratulate you. And I shook his hand. And then I asked him to leave the Chief's mess. And then that was when lessons learned for the Chiefs mess is when I started telling them, get to know your people, find out why they're acting the way they're acting, in order to get to the root of the problem to make it better for everybody. In the long run, we had a talk with work. We got together as a Chiefs mess, got them his uniforms, and then Doc, who also was on the green side in Iraq, couldn't relate to Seaman Rourke. So we allowed Seaman Rourke to work for Doc. The captain, before the DRB, I already told the captain what I knew of Seaman Rourke. So we already knew the captain wasn't going to take in the mess. So he allowed us that. He approved everything, let him work for Doc, and he worked out great. To this day, Seaman Rourke, I believe, just became a lieutenant on a fire department in New York. He's doing great. And ever since that experience, it's changed his life. And in fact, I talked to Steve Alonso not too long ago, and he told me, hey, I hung out with him when I was home on leave. And he's turned his whole life around. It was because of that experience where someone actually took the time to acknowledge, what he's done. So that ties into servant leadership once again. So know your people, find out why they're doing what they're doing in order to get to the root of the problem, so everybody's better instead of being a dictator. Hey, you're going to mass.
And that's the easy way out. That's the easy way out. Take them to mass, make them somebody else's problem, kick them out. And that doesn't solve anything. You got to get to the heart of the issue. There's a reason why people act the way they act. And we're going to run a little bit long because there's one more servant leadership story that I want you to share. And it happened on the USS Dewey. And again, getting to know your people and a lot of what you're talking about, especially at a senior position, is not just setting an example, but sometimes you're put in a position. Not sometimes you're put in a position because you've established yourself, and there's trust. Leadership trusts you, and they trust you to make the right decisions. And oftentimes we need the chief's mess in our case, or those underneath us. Hey, you may not understand it. You may not see the big picture, but I do. So you trust me. And there's one of those trust situations when you get a phone call from the public affairs officer at Naval Base San Diego, because they wanted one of the original Dewey crew members from World War II, rode on the first Dewey ship. If I remember, this man was on hospice, and he had just wanted to lay eyes on a new destroyer called Dewey. But that wasn't enough for Joe Grgetich.
Funny you brought that up. We didn't talk about this, David. So you're throwing me through the loop. No, that's a beautiful story. It's actually still one of the most viewed topics on the internet. If you look up Bud Cloud, that's his name. He was an EM2. Yeah, his daughter just wanted to. He had 4 or 5 days left to be with us, and then when we met him, I found out he was on the Dewey. I'm like, we're the Dewey. So it was like, wow. They had no idea we were the Dewey. They weren't coming to see the Dewey. They're just coming to see a ship. So I got my Sailor of the Year with me, and I got I got the first class mess.
Okay.
I got half the Chief's mess, and we wheeled Bud Cloud in, and then they carried him in the wheelchair, and we put him on the forecastle, and then we had a good 100 people up there, first classes and Chiefs, and we were just talking. Then we find out he was actually on the Dewey in Pearl Harbor. So I said, I tell EM1 Flores, I said, hey, go down to the mess decks, take off the picture off the wall. We actually got a picture of the ship during Pearl Harbor. So he goes up and, wow, Bud Cloud, he's in the picture. He's like, there's my girl. He's got tears. There's me, right? So he's actually in this historical picture that we just happened to take off the mess decks just to show him a picture of the ship, and he just happens to be in the picture. And so on December 7th, him and a buddy had the duty, and he was drinking milk in the mess decks when everything was happening. And the Dewey was actually sinking, so it was tied up next to another ship, and that was sinking. And when it was tied up, it was bringing the Dewey over. So it was sinking the Dewey. The only thing that saved the Dewey, Bud said, was, the stacks back then were a little bit bigger. And the stack caught the stack of the other, or the port side of the other ship, and it cracked the stack. And all that weight lifted them back up, so they didn't actually sink. But they were going down, and he was on board when that was happening. So that was a very memorable event. We were all touched. Dion Eisman, my gunner's mate at the time, he was moved. He was in charge of our funeral detail. We did some funeral details on the flight deck underway and stuff, and he was familiar with a 21 gun salute. Me being in charge of honors and ceremonies, had some pointers too, and we actually sent a crew to the memorial up in Riverside, and we sent Bud off properly with a 21 gun salute by our guys. It was incredible. And then a month later we saw that internet post. We had no idea. I mean, we didn't do it for the accolades or anything like that. I was impressed that he was on the Dewey. 2, he was on the Dewey during Pearl Harbor. 3, he's in a picture on our ship. It was just an incredible. So we gave him coins, hats, and from what I understand, reading the article, he was buried with none of his tools that he was scheduled to be buried with. All the coins and hats that we gave him that day. So 4 days later, Bud passed. So I'm glad we sent him off the right way. It was sad to see him go, but it was an experience I'll never forget. It was awesome. It was awesome.
Well, it's an experience that your crew will never forget as well. And, as a servant leader, I think that we can ask for nothing more than to be able to make things better, for those that we have opportunity to lead. And, hopefully they'll go on and continue to, lead better than us and just replicate what we do that much better. So listen, before we take off, one last question for you, Joe. What's the biggest leadership mistake that you've made, but you were lucky, right? We all have had those leadership errors, like, man, I dodged a bullet this time. You ever dodged any bullets?
Of course, don't we all? Look, instead of telling you about all my mistakes and dodging bullets, let me just leave you with this. A lot of the sailors today, E5s, E6, are trying to get to that pinnacle in their career where they decide to make it a career and they want to become a chief. And we don't want that. As a command master chief, I never wanted that perfect sailor that checks all the boxes. I want those that make the mistakes. Because by the time they get to me, they've made the mistake. I'm pretty sure that if they learn from their mistake, they won't make it again. Nobody's perfect. But sometimes, those checks in the boxes are trying to make people perfect. And they got it in their head. They think they're perfect, and none of us are perfect. It took me 17 years to even make chief. So, I didn't ever quit, but I was just never good enough. I never had that LPO at sea because I was always in the amphib. So I'm not going to blame it on anything but me and my test-taking skills. But I never had a mentor either back then. So, it's just nobody's perfect. So, yeah, I've come across a lot of close calls, but I've always managed to get off the fence and sway to the right. Just if you think it's wrong and it smells like it's wrong, guess what? It's wrong. It's probably wrong. So always do the right thing every time. And I think that was a motto at AC5 years ago. Always do the right thing every time, the first time. So, and I've kind of lived by that. I still have made mistakes, and like Patton once said, we don't measure one's success on how high they ascertain themselves on the ladder of success. We measure one's success as how far they've fallen and how high they climb back up.
So thank you, Joe, for spending time with us today. Thank you, everyone listening, for tuning in. Once again, this has been Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders. Today with Joe Grgetich, Navy Retired Command Master Chief. I'm David Deary, President of the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. Join us every 1st and the 15th military paydays for another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders.